On cheese listing, thanks to search filter and also Boolean filter and range filter, when we use the collection endpoint, there are a number of different ways that we can filter, like searching the title, description, and owner fields. That's pretty cool. Except we can only search by one field at a time. Like we can search for something in the title or something in the description, but we can't, for example, say $search equals and have that automatically search across multiple fields. But hey, that's no huge issue. When the built-in filters aren't enough, just make your own. Creating custom filters is both fun and weird. Let's go. Over in Source, how about in API Platform, create a new PHP class called Cheese Search Filter. As usual, this will need to implement an interface or extend some base class. In this case, we need to extend Abstract Filter. Make sure you get the one from Doctrine ORM. It's actually impossible to see which one we have here, so I'll randomly guess. Hey, I got it. If you chose the wrong one, you'll have to delete your project and start over. Or just delete this one line and manually say use Abstract Filter to get the right one. It turns out creating a filter is different based on the underlying data source. If your underlying data source is Doctrine ORM, creating a filter will look one way. But if your underlying data is, for example, Elasticsearch, which is something API Platform has built-in support for, then a custom filter will look different. And if you have a completely custom API resource like Daily Stats, creating a custom filter looks even another way. We'll talk about how to create a custom filter for Daily Stats in a few minutes. When we extend Abstract Filter, as you can see, we need to implement a couple of methods. Go to Code Generate or Command N on a Mac and select Implement Methods to generate the two methods we need. Filters are ultimately two parts. They're the logic that does the filtering, which is filter property, and then the logic that describes how the filter works, which is used in the documentation. That's the job of getDescription. Let's start there. To help fill in this method, let's cheat and look at some core classes. Hit Shift and look for propertyFilter.php. Make sure to include non-project items. Open that up. As a reminder, property filter is an odd filter that is used to return less fields on each result. That's different than most filters, whose job is to return less items in the collection. In property filter, search for getDescription. Excellent. So what getDescription returns is an array of the query parameters that can be used to activate this filter. And under each one, we set a bunch of array keys that are ultimately used to generate documentation for that query parameter. Unfortunately, nobody likes random arrays like this. And honestly, the best way to see what keys we should fill in is by checking out these core classes. Close this filter and let's open one more. Hit Shift and look for searchFilter.php. And make sure to include non-project items. In this case, getDescription actually lives in searchFilterTrait. Hold Command or Control and click to open that. This returns the exact same structure, except that it's a bit more complex. It says properties equals this arrow getProperties and loops over those to create the same array structure we saw earlier, with one query param per property. In cheese listing, when you use search filter, you can pass it a properties option that says, I want this search filter to work on all 4 of these properties. What that effectively does is create 4 different possible query parameters that you can use. And so the getDescription method returns an array with 4 items in it. Close up those core classes. Now, because we're extending Abstract Filter, one of the properties we magically have access to is this arrow properties. Let's DD that here so we can see what it looks like. DD this arrow properties. Back at the browser, open a new tab and go to /API/cheeses.jsonld. But we won't hit the dump yet. Why? Because we haven't told API Platform that we want our cheese listing to use this filter. How do we do that? We already know how. Back in cheese listing, we've done this before with other filters. Anywhere in here, add @API filter with cheese search filter : class. Unfortunately, PHP Storm doesn't autocomplete that for me, so I'll copy the class name and add it on top manually. Use app/API platform/cheese search filter. As soon as we do this, when we refresh the endpoint, even though I don't have any query parameters in the URL, it does hit get description. Why? Because in JSON-LD Hydra, the filter documentation is part of the response. Apparently, this arrow properties is null. Here is where and when this arrow properties comes into play. Often, and as we've seen, you can pass which properties you want a filter to operate on. For example, if we wanted our filter to be configurable, we could say properties equals and pass it price or an array of fields. As soon as we have this, when we refresh, we get price in the array. So if you want the properties on your filter to be configurable, that is the purpose of this arrow properties. Now, in our case, we are creating this filter entirely for a single class for our application. So we don't need to worry about making it configurable. Remove the properties option from the annotation. We're going to completely ignore this arrow properties and do whatever we want. Next, we now know enough to fill in get description for our filter. Once we've done that, we'll bring it to life.